Russia today says it has intercepted a Ukrainian commando team seeking to conduct sabotage operations in Russia's Bryansk region. 2 Ukrainian servicemen were killed in a firefight and 5 were captured, including 3 who were injured. Something we've been asking ourselves on this show a lot is, how are Ukrainians talked into these missions, knowing their chance of success is so small? This is something that Redacted correspondent Mike Jones, who's in Russia, has been speaking to members of the Ukrainian army about. He's been speaking to members who were captured, who are telling us their experience, and he joins us today to discuss this. So thanks for joining us. Maybe you can give us a little background about how you're seeking out these interviews and what you're learning.
Yes, I will clarify that I, as a British citizen, I'm not permitted to interview these prisoners. The interviews that I've gathered are actually through Maria Lelanova. She has her own Telegram channel, and she's the one that actually interviewed the prisoners. And being Russian speaking, it's obviously far more comfortable for her to do so. She's recently returned from her trip to Donbass and has provided me with these interviews. We've translated and subtitled them. You mentioned about this almost suicidal raid in Bryansk, just one of many that we've seen. And this was one of quite shocking revelations that she discovered in talking to one of these prisoners who wished to highlight the use of amphetamines in the Ukrainian army and its effect on people. He claims that these are issued free of charge. They are being paid for, presumably, by US tax dollars, or at least Western collective Western countries' tax money. They are ordered to take these pills. They are in open packages, so there's no way of telling what exactly the substance is. They are ordered to take them, and then they proceed on their missions. He claims he is motivated to highlight this issue because of the amount of men that are dying as a result. He claims that they are ordered through minefields, because one of the effects of these amphetamines is you don't feel fear and you do not feel pain. So he said many of his comrades would be wounded, but they wouldn't notice. And with the loss of blood, the heart will just stop after about a minute and a half, he claims. So in the context of these, what seem to be suicidal missions and incursions into Russia, that kind of makes sense now, how these soldiers, in this case, this was a man simply returning from his dacha, and he was just given a summons and sent to the front line. Another complaint he had, that many people have only held an automatic rifle 4 times before they're being pushed into the front lines, effectively drugged up and sent on to these missions.
That's right. So let's listen to him say that, and then we'll come back.
Скажите, пожалуйста, как вас зовут?
Виктор Леонидович.
Сколько вам лет?
45.
Вы откуда?
Винница.
Из Винницы? А вы давно в плену?
2 месяца.
А сколько времени на фронте до этого провели?
Год и месяц.
Год и месяц?
Да.
Скажите, пожалуйста, вот я так понимаю, вы согласились рассказать о том, что есть такой момент, что украинские военные используют наркотические вещества.
Да.
Вот можете сказать, пожалуйста?
Ну, используется самое легкое, это конопля, то есть это...
Танки курить.
Да, это, ну как сказать, это как аспирин, образно. То есть это самое легкое.
Это относительно безвредно.
Да. Потом амфетамины какие-то давали, такие, что, ну, ты выпиваешь, тебе болевой эффект.
Выдавались в какой форме?
Нам давали их уже открытые.
А, то есть вы не видели упаковку?
Нет.
Просто...
То есть ты выпиваешь, у тебя эйфория и
кто давал?
бесстрашие. Давал наш медик из батальона. То есть это все шло через него. Потому что...
Он их выдавал как вот тебе пластырь, вот тебе аспирин, вот тебе от простуды, а вот тебе амфетаминчик.
Приехал, вот вы идете на позицию, скажем так, в боевуху, вот перед боем выпить.
Так, а сами медики, то есть не то, что там кто-то покупал, их просто так выдавали?
Нет, а выдавали, никто ничего не покупал.
Всем-всем?
Тем, кто шел на боевые.
Ну, то есть 100% количеству людей, которые идут на боевые войны,
да.
Они получали в числе прочего амфетамин, как, я не знаю, часть аптечки.
Ну, в принципе, да, это часть аптечки шла.
И как это на организм влияло? То есть что происходило с человеком, когда он взял?
Ты не чувствуешь боли, и как бы заниженный порог страха, и ты шуруешь
То есть такой
просто.
терминатор такой пошел.
Да.
The other claim that he makes is due in part to the lack of training that these Ukrainian soldiers are receiving. Of course, many of them are fearful and don't know what to do in the circumstances. As they have taken these amphetamines, that feeling goes away and they no longer fear the circumstances that they're being sent into, as we've seen in the offensive in Robotyne in the south, where they just seemingly keep sending these men forward. This claim that he makes appears to make sense.
Неподготовленного запустить, чтобы он не боялся.
Ну это вообще какой-то совсем бесчеловечный все.
Ну, что было, то было, как бы то.
А можно было отказаться и сказать, я не буду это принимать?
Ну, это контролировалось, то есть, если уже знали, что по-любому это будет стычка, то по таблетке запили и вперед.
Ну, я что хочу, это было, тем не менее, добровольное было решение, я выпью таблетку. Или можно было сказать, я не буду и идти без нее?
Как бы нет, это было принудительно.
One of the questions that Maria posed to this particular prisoner was, how did he end up at the front lines? He told her that he'd been captured for about 3 months, and prior to that, he had been returning to the city from his countryside residence, known as a dacha, in Russia, to see his parents, and he was given a summons. He was stopped at one of the checkpoints on the way to his hometown, and given the option, either sign the summons and go to the front lines now, or we send you to jail. So there really wasn't any choice for him other than those two options. He couldn't just go about his merry way or even appeal. These were the immediate options given. The other thing she asked was, if you were returned home, would you fight anymore? He said, no, I've seen enough. I've seen too much. I've seen how the commanders treat soldiers. I've seen the lack of equipment. And of course, he has described there how they are even being intoxicated, both with alcohol as well. He claims the first death in his platoon was a man who'd been drinking for an entire year and cirrhosis of his liver. The last thing she asked was a very important question. How did he feel towards the Russians? Did he hate them? And he emphatically said, no, we don't hate the Russians at all. And that's another reason why I don't want anything to do with this conflict.
That's awful. Now, another video that you wanted to highlight today was with a prisoner of war who said he was told to fire off ammo into fields in order to use it up so that the West would send more, to just keep this as an assembly belt. What can you tell us about this? And then we'll take a look at it.
Yeah, this was a very interesting individual. He was only identified by the battalion, the 14th Separate Motorized Brigade. His voice was changed and his face was blurred due to the sensitivity of the information that he was captured with. There's obviously a lot that the Russian authorities wish to investigate here, because most notably on his phone was a spreadsheet that he claims was provided to him by his Ukrainian commanders with notes in English about these targets and the coordinates for the artillery batteries to fire at. He claims he highlighted to his commanders that there were discrepancies in these notes, some of them claiming, for instance, that one would be a weapons factory. When he then investigated, it turned out to be an empty field. He queried this with his commanders, and he was told to sit down and shut up and carry on with the orders. The other notable aspect were many of these targets were in Russian territory, both mainland Russia and, well, let's call it contested Russian territory, as well as civilian objects. He explicitly stated he queried markets, offices, and schools. As he scrolls through, it's in Russian. Masha told me that it appears that some of these even have the agencies where these coordinates originated from, one being CIA.
Я военнослужащий 14-й отдельной мотострелковой бригады ЗСУ, которая дислоцировалась на Купинском направлении. В мои обязанности входила проверка боеготовности подразделений, находящихся на передовой. Попал в плен после того, как на наши позиции начали наступать российские военнослужащие. Покинуть эти позиции я не имел возможности в связи с сильным артиллерийским огнем. При моем осмотре был обнаружен телефон, на котором имелись различные фотоматериалы, распорядительные документы штаба. В частности, это были целеуказания для артиллерийских подразделений с пояснениями на английском языке. На регулярной основе украинское командование передает в наши подразделения ЗСУ координаты целей, полученные от американцев. При этом в ходе проверки этой информации неоднократно было установлено, что объекты поражения являются гражданской инфраструктурой. Это торговые центры, офисы, рынки и так далее. Либо это глубина территорий Российской Федерации и никак не используются в военных целях. Мои попытки донести до вышестоящего командования информацию об имеющихся неточностях в целеуказаниях, либо необходимости проведения повторных аэрофотоснимков территории остались без внимания. Вот телефон, в котором у меня более 1000 целей. В основном это глубина России. Такие города, как Крым, Краснодар, Ростов, Курск. При проверке координат мы узнали, что очень много пустых целей, то есть несуществующих. Например, указан склад боеприпасов, а стреляли по каким-то полям, где никого нет и никогда не было. Я думаю, что американцы специально дают подставные координаты, чтобы у нас был большой расход боекомплектов. И мы в очередной раз запрашивали военную помощь у них.
Goodness gracious. But yet we're not told about this. Just today, that your story just markedly contrasts this Telegraph story published today telling us that Ukraine is so successful with their drone attacks. We know nothing of the suffering of soldiers or wasting of ammo or attacks on civilians. We would know nothing if we were to rely on the Western media. What do you make of stories like this?
I read it with a wry smile. Opinion presented as fact for the most part from what I saw. When it tried to justify Russia's attacks on civilian populations, it was linked to the strike at Chernigov, which was targeting high-ranking military personnel that had gathered there back in early August, I think that was, if memory serves correctly. It then tries to claim that Ukraine's strategy with drones is superior to Russia. It claimed that Russia lacks the air defenses to threaten Ukrainian aircraft at the front, which again made me smile slightly because I wondered where the Ukrainian Air Force has gone. Clearly, it merely evaporated as it approached the Russian front lines, if we're to believe the Telegraph. It then talked and downplayed the Russian drone strikes, which were in last fall. It's then said, how Russia just attacking electricity in winter is of little consequence. Well, under General Surovikin, it brought the railroad, the electricity-supplied railroads to a halt. This very much affected the frontline operations of Ukraine because they weren't able to deliver Western-supplied equipment and ammunition at that time. It then sort of makes one claim of, one attack in Moscow against a residential building can be forgiven as it may have been retribution. The BBC then published a map of the strikes of Ukraine, both with sea drones and air drones, many, as can be seen, focused on Moscow, yet this article claiming that Ukraine focuses on military targets. It then also talked about, following Ukraine's attack on the Kerch Bridge, Russia retaliated by hitting port infrastructure. So it made no mention that, it didn't really highlight that, yes, attacking the Kerch Bridge was civilian infrastructure. Mm-hmm. And then goes on to say, Ukrainian commanders can't waste the moral high ground, which I also thought was a rather rich line there.
It's almost as if all of this we can poke holes on if we're paying attention, if we've been doing our homework. It's almost as if they just write the headline as they want it to be and then fill it with any kind of crap. Like it literally could be a graphic design class in college where you just put Latin in there and it doesn't matter. And you
Absolutely. And keep in mind, the author was a former Department of Defense analyst. I thought for a UK publication, having a US Department of Defense author or former analyst, I thought that did also show where this sentiment was originating from.
Right, with no attribution in the title, so you would accept it as fact. Okay, well, thank you for bringing us a different side of this story today, as always, and showing us what you're able to find on the ground there in Russia. We appreciate it as always. You can follow Mike Jones on Telegram and on other platforms, and always here on Redacted. So thanks again.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for watching this segment here at Redacted. We are live every day at 4 p.m. Eastern Time, trying to share the stories that the mainstream media will not cover. You should also come over and join our community of Redacted Rebels over at redacted.inc. That's our private locals community where we can share exclusive content that we simply cannot share here on YouTube. Come over and join the rebellion together right now by going to redacted.inc. We'll see you next time.